Hello, my name is LoG and welcome to part 4 of this brother-to-brother solo tutorial. If you enjoy this type of instructional material, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And now let's get on to the lesson. Okay, real quick recap on the previous progression because it does kind of lead into where we're about to be. That was the 2-5 of B flat and then the 5 of C minor, all with F in the bass. So here's the 2-5 of B flat, 2 with F in the bass, 5, F's already in the bass. One chord, the B flat major with F in the bass, and here's technically that G dominant with F in the bass again. You can really see it right here because there's this exact same chord, and then we put G in the bass. That's really the chord that you're kind of implying at that moment. And where does that take us? That takes us to the C minor, that G dominant with that F chord on top, if I can play it. That chord eventually takes us here to the C minor. That's the 5 of C minor, which is the first chord of this section. So this section, really simple, moves like this. 2 minor 7 chords, C minor, D minor, just like that. Then up a fret, do the same move. E flat minor, F minor. So check it out. C minor, D minor, E flat minor, F minor. Pretty common figure where you do 2 minor chords and then up a fret, do the same thing. It's like kind of a little bit of a key change, which can sound pretty cool, especially when you connect with a melody or a solo. And then we end finally with a G chord. And the G chord in particular is definitely featuring the 2. The 2 is not necessarily like the highest note of the chord, but it is definitely in there because there's a little connecting melody that makes that part sound really good, which I'll show you here in a second. But the voicing that I've been using to play that G chord up top kind of looks like this. It's one of my favorite shapes. It's G major with the voicing of 1, 5, 7, and 2. So major 7 with a 2, major 9 if you want to call it that. No third in this chord. You could, of course, rearrange it so that there is the third. I kind of like this one. You can also think about it like a D chord because this is literally 1, 3, 5 of D with G in the bass. It's always a nice way to get that voicing. You can kind of do it like this too. Right, here's a D chord, the 5, 1, 3 of D, and then root of G. Really common shape, really common drop D chord, by the way, because it looks like this instead of like that. So pretty fun one to play. Now, the cool thing about this this progression is you hear like a little melody on top. So if you listen to the B string note, right, you hear this walk up, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, which is kind of a nice, you know, kind of the melody itself is kind of unstable as the chords are going, but then when it finally resolves that G, it's super satisfying. It's a really cool sound. So that's pretty much what's going on. Again, super easy, just C minor, D minor, E flat minor, F minor, and then G major. You can play whichever G major you want as long as that 2 is being featured because that's kind of the connector or the finished note of that little melody that's happening throughout the progression. So there's nothing really too much to say about this harmony. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, as you can see. Just some minor chords moving up like that, eventually resolving on the G. But if you did want to dive into it, another explanation could be this. So what is the chord that we're shooting for this whole time? We're really shooting for G. Whether it's G major or G minor, doesn't really matter right now. It's just we're shooting for G. So if we look at the C minor, D minor, that's pretty much just like a 4 and a 5 chord in G minor, right? If you want to think about it like B flat major, it's a 2 and a 3 chord, whatever makes the most sense to you. Those chords are pretty normal, but then the E flat minor and the F minor, those are the ones that kind of stand out as a little bit different, maybe a key change or something. But you could think about it like this, actually, if you wanted to. So if we're setting up G, what's the standard 5 of? D7, right? Here's our D7. What's the concept we've been using this whole time, in our lead at least? Up a half step melodic minor. So here's the D, up a half step, and we play minor. What chord is this? This is E flat, one of the minor chords, right? So it's like we're playing a normal C minor, D minor, and then we're playing that up a half step melodic minor sound in the chord, right? Now this chord doesn't technically fit in melodic minor because melodic minor has a normal 7. We're playing a flat 7 in the chord, but let's just forget about that for a second. So there's that chord, and then what about the F minor? How does that fit? Well, F minor as a sound exists inside E flat melodic minor, right? Here's our E flat melodic minor. Here's inside of that shape. All of those notes exist. That's the 2, the 4, the natural 6, and the root of E flat melodic minor, and that's a literal F minor 7. So that chord exists inside of that E flat melodic minor sound. So you could technically say both of these chords are part of that melodic minor sound, and they're both just simply setting up the G in the same way that we've been setting up many of the other chords throughout this solo. Or you could just disregard all of that and say, yeah, it just sounds cool to move up like this. That's a perfectly viable explanation as well. But if you want to maybe look for something else, maybe a little bit more thorough or a little more interesting, you can honestly explain it like that. Another thing you can do, if you like this sound, you can kind of experiment like this. You can say C minor, D minor, and then you can experiment more with the concept we just went over. E flat, melodic minor, and then spilling over into the F. You can do something like this, C minor, D minor, and then actually play E flat, melodic minor. So like E flat with a natural 6, natural 7, and then you can play F minor with natural 6, flat 7, because that's what it would naturally be over that chord in that E flat melodic minor sound, and then resolve. Get some pretty cool sounds like this. Right? Maybe to these notes, to these. Then resolve to G, get a little kind of little melody inside of those shapes. Really cool sounds. And that's kind of one of the main reasons why I always like to dissect things like this, to really find like the core sound, or what at least I think is the core sound, what makes sense to me, because then I can experiment, I can find variations, maybe I can use this sound in my own playing or my own writing or whatever, and because I know the core sound or the core concept that's happening, I can, do something that sounds totally different as long as I'm still keeping that concept in mind. So it's really important to kind of dive in like this. Of course, it's perfectly fine just to say, these are the chords, there they are, and I'm not going to think about it. That's perfectly fine too, but it's kind of nice to really dive in and see actually what's happening. So let me play these chords just along with this little melody, and then we'll get into the solo. It's pretty simple, pretty short. Let me turn on my click. So here we go. All right, let me play this part pretty slow, and then we'll talk about what's happening. So all of these licks are pretty much following the chord progression exactly, especially this first one. This should be a pretty familiar shape to you at this point. This is like a little minor 7 arpeggio, a little staircase off the G string with an added pinky note up top. So if we're thinking minor for this arpeggio, that would be 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and that's a C right there, which makes sense because the chord is a C minor at that moment. So again, and that's just simply B flat twice, pull off to G, B flat again, and then a little 3-string reverse or descending sweep down from the 5 flat 3 1. Not necessarily that good at those shapes for some reason, but anyway, that's the shape. After that, we jump right back up to the B flat on top, the flat 7, and we do this melody. So that kind of feels maybe more like an F major kind of sound, which makes sense because the chord at that moment is D minor, and D minor and F major are relative major minor. They have the same pentatonic scale. So if you're ever playing over D minor, you could instead play or think F major pentatonic, and it would work perfectly. So that's what that little melody is. Right, just walking back, B flat, A, G, F, just like that. Once we're here on the F, dip down to this B flat right here, play the same minor 7 shape that we were doing earlier, just ascending, and that's 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7 of B flat. And this is, by the way, over the E flat chord, the E flat minor. You might be saying, okay, interesting, B flat minor arpeggio over an E flat minor. How does that work? Well, this sound is another example of what I call a pretend chord, and that's when you have a chord like E flat minor and you pretend it's B flat minor and you play that in your lead. This one in particular is really cool because it's very easy to do, and it pretty much works over the majority of minor chords that you'll come across. And the concept is this: if you have a minor chord like E flat, go to its 5th, in this case it's B flat, and play minor arpeggio, minor pentatonic, etc. over that sound, and this is what will happen. If I play B flat minor pentatonic right here, here are the notes. Right? If I play E flat minor pentatonic starting on the B flat on the 5, these are the notes. Notice that one note is the only difference between those two shapes, those two pentatonic scales. And what note is this? This note is E flat minor's 3rd. So when we play B flat minor, that note is not there. We skip it. We play this. Right? We're skipping that note, going right from the 2 to the 4 of E flat. So when you play B flat minor on top of an E flat minor chord, it kind of sounds like suspended. You're accessing or targeting notes that are not 3, which is a very cool sound, and that's kind of what's happening up top right here. Another thing that's happening that I like a lot is the last note that's happening right here. And by the way, again, just a simple arpeggio, little sweep, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. That note right there that he sits on is the 4 of the E flat. And it's such a great note to sit on. It's one of my favorites. That would sound like this. If I sang this note and then played the E flat chord, it's just a really cool sound. At least I think so. You might hate it. I apologize if you do. It's one of my favorites. So after that, we're doing a real quick little 3-note pull-off, A flat, G, F. And to be honest, the F is fine, the A flat is fine. The G is actually the major third of E flat. So I don't really think there's any thought going into that. It's probably a comfortable sound shape that sounds good. And that note happens so fast that I wouldn't even consider it, but it is happening. And also in the video where I play the entire solo, I actually didn't even do that. I was doing like that. And as I listened to it again when I was prepping for this video, I did realize it's a little 3-note little pull-off, so I apologize for that. Anyway, after that, we're doing a big bend on the A flat to B flat, and that's during the F minor. And again, what note are we hitting? B flat of F minor is F minor's 4. Again, playing a minor chord, targeting the 4, featuring the 4 in the lead. That sounds like this. Very cool sound, one of my favorites. After we're doing that big bend up to the B flat, bring it back to the A flat F real fast. Right? Which makes sense. We're playing F minor. And then the next big bend is from G to A, which makes sense because the chord at this moment is now G, right? Bending up to G, bring it back to G, F sharp, and then B, D, F sharp. A lot of ways you can play that. I mean, you can do whatever fingering makes the most sense to you. I'm doing it like this. So like the tone of the top 3 strings. So that's pretty much that last little phrase sounds like this. Again, figure out however you want to play it. Something that's important to talk about here is, remember the chord that's going on at this moment? G major, major 7, with a 2 on top. So the first thing is, what is that bend up top? That big bend right when the chord hits. That's A, the 2 of G. So it's just, again, playing into the voicing the general sound of this G major with a 2 being featured, right? That's why that bend sounds good. Another thing that's important to know whenever you're playing over a major 7 is notice the note that's not really being played that much, right? We're doing the big bend up to the 2, bring it back, real quick, 1, then 7, then 3, 5, 7. Notice the note that we're playing a little bit, but not that much. The root, right? That's at the bottom of the bend, right there. That note is the root. That's a G. You might naturally think, G, of course that note is going to work over a G chord. It's the root of the chord. Why would I not be able to play that note? That is true, but when you are dealing with a major 7 chord, not only do you have a G, but you also have an F sharp, the note right next to G. And when you play that chord, the F sharp is a pretty powerful note. The 7 of the chord is a powerful note that kind of overpowers or dominates the root. So when your ears hear that chord, if you were to sing the root, like if I sang G over this chord, doesn't that sound pretty tense? You might say, wait, why does that sound tense? Because it's the root of the chord, it should sound fine. Again, it's because the 7 is also in that chord, the F sharp. So when that note is happening in the chord and I'm singing that note, it creates this. Which, not bad, not a bad thing at all, but it might not be the sound that you're going for. But if I, for example, sang the 7 of G, the F sharp, of course it's going to fill in just a little bit more. So that's definitely something you want to think about when you are soloing over a major 7 type chord, because it'll always kind of let you lock in, sound a little bit smoother over that chord. So that's pretty much it. Let me play the whole thing one more time. Here we go. Let me play it one more time with that little 3-note pull-off. That's pretty much it. So once again, pretty straightforward part. You just want to make sure your bends are in tune and everything feels good and you're getting as many of those notes loud and clear when you're doing your economy picking stuff. And that's pretty much it. Pretty simple little part, but that should pretty much cover it for this video. This solo's not, or this section isn't too difficult, so we're not going to do a backing track with it. We only got one more section to go, so I'll see you guys in that lesson.